Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my January 2022 reading wrap up. I am going to now be doing reading statistics at the beginning of these videos, and let me explain very briefly just in this video why I'm going to be doing this, and then I promise I won't bother explaining it in every single wrap up that I get to. I am tracking very specific things. I have two images that I will show you over the course of me explaining this. First up, I am tracking how many pages I read every single month. My goal for the year is to have an average of 60 pages read a day. That will get me to my end page goal because I am focusing on getting physical big books read this year, and I think that tracking it every single month will help me make sure I'm staying on top of that. As you can see, in January I did accomplish this. On average, I read 75 pages a day. I know there were many days that I did not physically read, but there were many days where I read 200 plus pages. As long as I'm averaging out above 60, I am going to be very happy with myself, and having an average above 60 means that I don't have to worry if I get into a slump in the future because I have these stats to help balance that out. I decided just to do average hours read too, because why not? If I'm going to be tracking my pages, I might as well track my hours too. That'll be some fun statistics for us to look at the end of the month. I am also going to have very specific ratings moving forward. So I am doing compile again, and I am doing my compile to the 100th decimal point. So 0.00. But I am, for the sake of my ratings in Notion, rounding them to the nearest 10th. So a lot of my ratings will be things like 4.9 or 1.8. For the sake of these charts, I am rounding to the nearest whole number, or what I feel like the book I put it as on Goodreads, because Goodreads doesn't let you even do half points. So for the month of January, I had 2 1-star books, which is not like me. I had 3 2-star books. This was a weird month, guys, such a weird month. I had 0 3-star books, I had 2 4-star books, and I had 4 5-star books. I'm also going to be now including my favorite, least favorite, and honorable mention for each and every month. I probably won't talk about them at this point of the video, but I want to start tracking that for future reasons. And this month I read 11 books. I put 2 on pause, which I will talk about briefly, and I DNF'd 2. I think I'm also not going to focus on talking about the books I DNF'd in my wrap-ups anymore. I will try and mention them every single month, but as I do a very in-depth DNF video at the end of the year and I talk about them in my weekly reading vlogs, I'm just going to mention them at the beginning of these videos, and I'm not going to go in depth as to what they're about and why I DNF'd them. And my average rating for the month was a 3.4, which is lower than my average rating for my lifetime and way lower than my average rating for 2021. So something happened this month and I don't totally know what it is. I also read mostly fantasy, as you can see. I think it was 9 fantasy books, 1 magical realism and 1 horror. Although the 1 magical realism is technically categorized as a fantasy horror, I felt like it better fit the category of magical realism, so that's why I put it in there. So the 2 books that I put on pause this month are Whisper of Shadow and Flames. I made it really close to page 100 in this book. I'm just not in the mood for it. And then the other book I put on pause was Nemesis Games. Once again, I'm not sure what happened in this one, but I put it on pause, but I made it 40% through this one. The 2 books I DNF'd were The Emperor's Wolves and The Starless Crown. One of them I made it to 40%, one of them I made it to about 30% through it. So first up we have Echoes and Empires by Morgan Rhodes. This was one of my most anticipated releases of this year. This was in my 22 books to read in 2022. I was so excited to get my hands on this book early. I actually managed to buy it before it was published because Barnes & Noble had it out. And then I was so disappointed in this book. This probably will make it on my most disappointing books of the year list, which is really sad because it is the first book I read this year. So Morgan Rhodes wrote the Fallen Kingdom series, which I really, really loved, which is why I picked this one up. But I do think some of why I enjoyed that series so much and I didn't enjoy this one is partially due to my age. I am much older now reading this than I was reading those, and they are definitely targeted at a younger YA demographic, which hasn't interested in me in a few years now. So Echoes and Empires, we are following Jocelyn. Her father used to be the prime minister of this land, and he was assassinated a few years ago or a year ago. I think it was a year ago. And she has been raised by the new prime minister who really doesn't care for her, but his daughter is her best friend. So they take care of her because the queen wants her to be well taken care of. One night at a gala, this thief breaks into the castle, and when he breaks in, he accidentally puts magic inside of Jocelyn, which is a big no-no because magic has been completely outlawed. Anyone who has it or uses it, even completely on accident, is either killed or sent away to prison. So Jocelyn fears for her life, fears to ask for help from the people who are closest to her in her life. And so she teams up with the thief who wants the magic that's inside of her in order to get it out of her. And they kind of go on this road trip type story to figure things out. It is a weird setting. I wouldn't put it in present day, but there was technology. So I guess it is a contemporary fantasy, but it wasn't like quite present day. Maybe it was like 20 years ago contemporary fantasy, which is already something I don't totally love. I do prefer my fantasy set into like a medieval or really just any time that's not current. My biggest issue with this story was the characters and the dialogue. It was so poorly done. I felt like the characters didn't really have any development. They kind of just bounced from opinion to opinion and you didn't get to see them grow or change that much. And then their dialogue was so choppy and poorly written that I was being pulled out of the story so much. The main love interest, who, if you aren't shocked, is the thief who breaks into the castle. His dialogue is used to build the entire world, but he is shown as this dark and mysterious and quiet person, and yet he talks and explains everything. Even things that our main character didn't ask him about, he just starts explaining. Like if she's in the room and magic happens, he just starts explaining it to her. And there was no reason for him to explain it to her other than we, the reader, don't know what's going on. So he's just giving us that information. And I just wish more thought would have been put into that. And I wish that someone would have sat and read his dialogue out loud because it is not the way that people speak. The plot was too easy throughout most of the story, and I feel like the major conflicts were resolved way too easily. It felt like there were no real stakes and that I really wasn't believing the fact that like Jocelyn couldn't return to the queen to tell her about the magic because the queen had made such an effort to be like, Jocelyn, I'll take care of you no matter what. And it also kind of felt like some of the characters were making problems out of situations that really didn't need to be a big issue just so that there was conflict in the book. And again, it didn't make sense for these characters to be making these issues the way they were. I think that most of the twists in this book were very predictable. There was one that actually got me and I was pleasantly surprised by that twist, but all of the other ones I was like, yeah, I saw that coming. I saw it coming, which aids into what I'm about to say, which is I feel like this book read a lot younger than it actually was targeted for. I would probably recommend this book to someone in like the 12-13 range, and I feel like she was really aiming for like 15. So I did end up rating this book a 1.2, which I put on Goodreads as a 1. And up next I have Zodiac Academy Book 2. So this is the sequel to the first book in the Zodiac Academy series, which I am currently reading through with a friend. It's addicting. It's not a good series, but it is absolutely addicting. And if you're just wanting a grand old time, an easy book to get through, but you're not necessarily looking for something that's going to be like amazing, then I can't recommend anything better. I did end up rating this book a 2.4, which I rounded to a 2.5. And I had lots of things to say about it in the reading vlog where I read it. But what this story is about is these two twins who believe they are human and find out at the beginning of book 1 that they are changelings, so they are actually fae and they are actually the next in line for the throne. They are taken to this magical school, which is very much a ripoff of Hogwarts. There's house points, there's basically Quidditch, yet the author decided to make it smutty and a bully romance. So these two girls are at this school learning how to do things, but pretty much everyone hates them, and there are these 4 heirs who were supposed to inherit the throne because everyone in the world thought that these two girls were dead. But when these girls pop back up and are supposed to take over the throne, even though the girls say they do not want the throne, the four heirs are doing everything in their power to make their lives as miserable as possible. Basically what this book boiled down to is I couldn't put it down. I read it, I think, in like 3 days, and I also read book 1 in like 3 days. It's just a quick and easy book, and it's over 500 pages. I enjoyed this book more than book 1 because one of the twins in this book, I think it's Tori, ended up standing up for herself a lot more. So it is a bully romance, so we know that the two girls are going to get with their bullies at some point, or at least one of them might be with a bully, one of them might be with someone else. So through book 1 though, they pretty much just lay down and take a lot of the torment that these people are giving to them. And to be fair, book 1 is 2 weeks long and book 2 is a week and a half of their lives. But I really liked seeing Tori stand up for herself and her sister a lot more. And I liked seeing both of them start pranking and getting back at the heirs. I think that this book really lost me because it introduced a lot of concepts, but I thought it was going to build on the world a lot more than book 1 did, and it didn't. There were a lot of things that I'm still having questions about and I'm still really unsure about, and I feel like I shouldn't have to read to book 3, 4, 5, whatever in order to understand how your world is working when it's something that directly affects our main characters. I was gonna rate this book a 3-star, but I ended up getting a little bit disappointed in that aspect of it and not having this understanding of things that were going on. So I did knock it down to a 2.5 specifically for that reason. And then my final kind of complaint about this book is it seems like we're getting very much into the idea that both of our girls are in a love triangle. And I feel like if you're going to have two main characters, you can have one of them be in a love triangle, but can you do something different with the other one? The next book I picked up was Fever Dream, and this is my one horror that I read for the month. I wasn't on purpose. I was looking for something short because I felt like I was getting very much into a funk into the month. As you can tell, my first 2 books were not super successes. So I picked this one up from my library. It was really, really short. I cannot remember right now how long the audiobook was, but it is basically about this woman who's in this hospital bed and she has this voice speaking to her, and he is trying to get the story of kind of how she got into the hospital bed. And he is talking to her about his mother, who is in this woman's memory of how she got into the hospital. And it is relating the story of when he was a little boy and he was accidentally poisoned by his mother, and relating it to the story of how she and her daughter are both ending up. I actually really, really enjoyed this book. It lived up to its title. It felt like a fever dream. And so if you're not into that kind of like weird horror, you're not gonna like it. But if you're into like really short, weird horror books, I think this is a great one to pick up, and I do like highly recommend it. I ended up rating it a 4.1. It was exactly what I needed at this time. Sometimes I'm not looking for like the next great classic, not looking for something that's going to like blow me away. Sometimes I just want to feel like mediocre about a book, and mediocre is too harsh of a word. Like sometimes I'm going into a book and all I want is it to be a 4-star read. This book was exactly that, and it was exactly what I was in the mood for. I liked what it did with the book. I liked what it had to say about the world. I think that the magic could have been explained a little bit more, but also it's a fever dream. Like things don't have to have logic and they don't have to be explained. So I feel like it's acceptable that it went the way that it did. And one thing I really liked about it, which I know not everyone likes, so I will tell you about it now, is it did have an open ending. Next up is Iron Widow, YA sci-fi about a young girl. In this world, there are these giant like Megatron robot-like things that the Empire is using to fight battles against these other creatures. And in order to use one, they have to have 2 people inside of them. It has to be a man who like controls the machine and a woman who powers the machine. And almost every single time they go out and fight in them, the woman is killed. And so women are basically kept as slaves in this society, and our daughters are sold off to the Empire so family can have more money. Basically soldiers for a day and then killed. Our main character is seeking revenge because her older sister willingly went off for honor and glory and was killed by this very specific man soldier on the front line. And so she decides that she wants to get sold off into the army and go and be his like woman assistant. They call them concubines, and try to murder him. The book takes lots of different turns and has such amazing things in it. That's only like the first little bit of the story, but I absolutely loved this book. I think that this is an outstanding novel. I think that this is going to be on so many people's favorites of the year list. This book was amazing, so well written, especially for a debut, but for any book that I've read. This is what I'm talking about when I say that like YA books don't have to be the way they are. Is this one stood out and was so good and didn't do the weird tropey things that YA likes to do a lot of times. Every single time I thought she was going to do something, she did the opposite, and I was so happy with that realization. This book had a lot of feminist issues brought up in it and talked a lot about women's rights and women's bodies. There's also a polyamorous relationship. It wasn't a huge part of the story, but it is something that the author talks about a lot online, so I'm fine with saying here. I ended up rating this a 4.9 because my ratings are getting so ridiculous this year. This like point system, you hate it, just tell me in the comments and I'll go back to doing the old one, but it makes sense to me. Next up, I read Age of Assassin, which is the first book in the Wounded Kingdom trilogy by R.J. Barker. I will be reading this entire trilogy this year. I really enjoyed this one and was pleasantly surprised by a lot of it. I do own the next two books and the first book in her next series, which is the Bone Child series. It's somewhere around here. So we're following a young boy named Gurton, which is the worst. I'm so sorry if your name is Gurton, but that's so bad. We're following this young boy and his master, who is a master assassin, and she is called into the palace one day in order to protect the prince in line for the throne, because the queen believes that an assassin is trying to kill him, and she believes that the best way to protect him is to hire an assassin who knows how assassins think. So the master comes in as a court jester so she can get in and understand all of the different politics and be in places that normal people wouldn't be able to be. And our main character Gurton comes in as like a distant low noble's son who is going to like train to be a knight. So he's right there with the prince training to be a knight in the realm. He's making friends, he's figuring out who's trying to kill the prince, and the entire time the prince is absolutely an asshole. There's lots of politics in this, and they start to notice this plot where they think that this other family might be trying to get in line for the throne, and it's just a very interesting and well done political fantasy with lots of people dying, lots of blood, but not necessarily like super gory either. It was really intriguing and just a really good book, and I enjoyed myself immensely. Our main character Gurton is funny, but like actually funny, and not just in a like, oh, I think I'm funny, but I'm actually just arrogant kind of way. I really enjoyed reading about him. He is disabled, and it is something that affects him and affects how he has to do things. I absolutely loved him, and I'm really excited to be picking up the next book in the series because I think I'm kind of starting to figure out where I think the book is going to go next, and I'm hoping I'm right. There is some magic in the world, but it's not as large a point of the story as I thought it was going to be, and I think that the main romance in the story wasn't done super well. I would have liked to see more development of what made them feel the way they did for each other, but overall it was a really good book and I really enjoyed it, and I actually rated it a 4-star flat. No points, no nothing else. Next, I read Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie, which is the sequel to A Blade Itself, and the next book is The Last Argument of Kings. I really enjoyed this book. I pretty much praise Joe Abercrombie at this point. I've only read 2 books, this one and The Blade Itself, but both of them I have rated basically a 5-star. So I ended up rating this one a 4.9 as well, which on Goodreads is a 5-star. So because this one is a sequel, I can't totally get into what this one is about, but basically book 1 is about a group of characters coming together, not totally realizing that they're coming together to stop this war. And then book 2 is about them going on this journey to find this item that they think will help them stop the war, along with a few side characters doing their own quests and missions. One character is off fighting on the front line trying to protect the prince, and another character is off fighting in this like city on the edge of collapse because of the war and trying to get control of the situation. It was so good. Oh my God. I don't even really have anything to say. Like, Joe Abercrombie is just good at writing. Like, he wrote such good characters, such dark scenes, such good character development happened in this book. It was what I wanted. I fell in love so hard with these characters. Like, book one, I loved them. Book two, I am infatuated with them. I don't know what I'm gonna do when I finish book three and I'm done with them forever. I also don't know what I'm gonna do if Joe Abercrombie kills some of these people. Like, I'm just going to be upsetty. His characters are so well-rounded. Like, I know I'm harping on the characters, but like, please, his characters are so good. I didn't like this quite as much as book one. Book one, I would say, is a perfect 5-star in my opinion, and book two is a 4.9, which, like I said, is a 5-star, but you can see that there was just like something about it that didn't quite hit that perfect 5-star that some books that I've read have done. This is a grim, dark series, so go into it knowing that, and knowing that like bad things are going to happen to these people. Next up, I read The Two-Faced Queen, which is the sequel to Kingdom of Liars, and this one, this book is the reason why I don't often read sequels. Book one, I ended up rating a 3-star. Book two, I ended up rating a 1.8, which I rounded down on Goodreads, I think, to a 1-star. This book was so illogical and so poorly written that I couldn't believe it was written by the same person who wrote book one. If you enjoyed book one, I recommend just stay there. Just stay at book one. It was a good, enjoyable debut. Book two will not be good or enjoyable or worth reading, in my opinion. In book one, we're following this outcast named Michael. His father was a kingsman, so he was supposed to protect the crown and was put on trial for killing the next king in line for the crown. So Michael and his family are living with this traitorous name over their head, and Michael is going about his life trying to prove that his father didn't actually kill the prince in line to the throne. And also there's all this kind of magic where if you use magic untrained in this world, you lose memories and sometimes you lose abilities. And then there's also this whole entire bit about there being 2 moons and one of them is falling to earth and causing problems, and there's this whole entire myth and legend about why the moon would be doing that. 2 is about Michael, who everyone believes he has now killed someone. He didn't actually kill that person, and he's going about his life trying to prove that he didn't do it. He has teamed up with some mercenaries and is trying to help out with some issues that are happening in the city. Generally, it was just a weird, illogical, poorly written book. I did read it with my book club for this month, so I tabbed it a little bit up. And generally, what all of us seem to agree on is it didn't make sense where this book went and how it went there from book one, and the world really wasn't explained and explored a lot more in the sense that we thought it was going to be. There were new things brought in, but most of the story didn't matter and didn't make sense. And that's all I have to say about it. My next book I will not be talking about because it is something for a secret TBR, but I did rate it a 2.4, rounding it to a 2-star. It was a fantasy book. It was a YA fantasy book. I will be talking about it on my channel shortly. After that, I read Wake the Bones. This is an arc that I have received from the publisher. This book does not come out until the summer. I believe it's July when it comes out, and I highly recommend that you all pre-order this book. This was so good and so enjoyable. I loved this book. I actually did some art journaling for it, which you'll be seeing on my channel shortly because I'm going to be doing an entire video dedicated to the review of this book. So I'm not going to go super in depth with it here because I will have that entire video in 2 weeks' time that you will be able to understand more about. But I recommend this book. This is the book where I marked it as magical realism, but on Goodreads it's marked as a horror fantasy. And I think the main reason why Goodreads marked it as that is because there are a few like jump scares in the book. There is some like magic in the book, but the book to me was much more about the characters and was much more about them growing and developing, and was much more about the fact that like magic was realistic in this contemporary world. Like, it felt very much like it could take place in our world in like a distant countryside where magic is still real kind of a thing, and much less about like a fantastical setting. This book is about this girl. I want to say her name is Laurel. For the time being, we're gonna stick with that. She has flunked out of college. She went away to college. Her mom died many years ago. She's trying to figure things out, make a life for herself, trying to find her place in the world. She grew up with these 3 guy friends that they were very, very close to each other. They lived on this tobacco farm, and so they would farm in the summer. She was the only friend who went away for school. So it starts off with her returning home, and she is doing tobacco farming and then on the side doing taxidermy for extra money. And it's about her returning home and realizing that her home isn't exactly the same anymore because she was gone for that year and her friends kind of grew and changed, and she also grew and changed, but they also have this connection from their past and from when they were younger. That connection is still valid and still there, but is slightly different now. It's also a lot about our secondary character, Isaac. He knows he's gay. It's not his story about him like realizing that he's gay, but it's his story about him realizing that he loves his best friend and what he's willing to sacrifice for love and what he's not willing to sacrifice for love. He very much does not want to be in this small town anymore. He's tired of the bigots and the issues that being gay has brought him in this small town, but the person that he has fallen in love with does not want to leave this town and doesn't want to have a life outside of it, has a family here, has a dream of being a farmer here. And it's kind of about them both realizing that sometimes love isn't enough, but also it's so hard to love someone who wants something very different out of life than you do. Our main character, Laurel, also has a love interest in this story, and I swear this author did such a good job writing the love interests, and it was just so believable. I felt the yearning so strongly in this book. But basically, while they're doing all their tobacco farming and falling in love and realizing that they're now all adults and life is different now, there is the devil who is coming and cursing Laurel's farm and is bringing some problems, and they have to team up with this like teenage witch. I think she's like 19 years old, and try and use magic to get rid of the devil. So it's such a weird and unique book that fits into so many different genres and categories. It reminds me of the found family that you see in the Raven cycle. It reminds me of some of the weirdness that I saw in books like I Crawl Through It and You Must Not Miss. It reminded me of some of the dark fantasy body horror that I saw in House of Hollow. And all of those books are books that I love and have put onto like favorites lists and really, really enjoyed. So if you've enjoyed any of those, I recommend checking this one out. I will be talking about it more in that video in 2 weeks, so stay tuned for that. I did rate it a 4.6. I will be pre-ordering a copy of this. I highlighted and marked up so much of it. This author's writing is so beautiful and absolutely great. In that video that's coming out in 2 weeks, I will be reading snippets of the book that don't have spoilers in them, and they're just amazing. She did such a good job writing this book, and it's a debut. Next up, we have Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This is the last book in the Cosmere that I needed to read. It wasn't it, besties. It wasn't it. This is Brandon Sanderson's first book that he had published, so to be fair, he has grown and changed a lot since this book, but I didn't mesh with this one, and I know why. I'm about to explain why to you all. I'm just kind of sad that it happened, I guess. So this is the book about a city called Elantris, and 10 years ago, Elantris used to have these like godlike creatures living inside of it, and then all of a sudden they all lost their abilities and all seem to have this like plague-like death symptoms. And in this nearby city called Kai, people wake up sometimes with death. They wake up with this like splotchy skin and they can no longer grow. They are like ravished. They can't heal themselves anymore, and they are constantly living in agony. And so we're following 3 characters. One is the Prince of Kai, and he wakes up at the very beginning of the story with this disease, and he is sent into the city of Elantris to be like ostracized from his family, and they treat him as basically being dead in this realm. We are following this high prince soldier who is coming to the city of Kai because he believes that it is his life's mission to convert every single person in the world to his religion, and if he is successful in doing so, that his God will return and everyone will be happy and like everyone will go to heaven, kind of a thing. And then we are following this princess who was part of a different realm and in a trade agreement was supposed to come over and marry the prince. On her way over to the city of Kai, the prince is dead, is deemed dead. And so when she gets there, though, there was part of her marriage clause saying that if he or she died after they had like signed the agreement, that by all intents and purposes they would be considered married. So she has to stay in this realm, and she is figuring out the politics and trying to make it a better place, and she's actually genuinely pretty happy. Good things I can say about this: Brandon Sanderson is a good writer. He did a really good job writing this book. Yes, it was his first one, so it wasn't as good as some of his later books, but it was absolutely a great, enjoyable, like, the words weren't hard to read. I didn't connect with the characters, and I think that that's my biggest issue with this story. Is one of the things that really draws me into Brandon Sanderson's books is his characters are so relatable and so well done. And for this one, I didn't get that feeling from any of them. I felt like a lot of them were very, very flat, and I felt like a lot of their development was very flat. And the only character I can say at the end that I even kind of enjoyed was our main princess. But even then, I felt like she was very much a knockoff of characters, specifically from Warbreaker and from Stormlight. I mean, it's all the same author, so like there's going to be connections between his characters. Really have an issue with the magic in this world. I felt very confused by it the entire time, and even after the story has ended, I feel like it wasn't explained enough to me. One of the things that Brandon Sanderson can get critiqued about, especially in Mistborn, is it feels like he's kind of holding your hand when explaining the magic system to you. With Vin in Mistborn, she knows as much as we do at the beginning of the story as to how the magic works, and so she literally has Kelsier like sit down and teach her in a class. I like that. I know it can be kind of info dumpy, but also like I feel like I genuinely understand how it works and what's going on, and as you continue on with Mistborn, you realize that not everything is how you thought it was. But with Elantris, I never feel like I was explained how things work. There were these like magical ball floating glowing people that could like communicate across distances and also like swore themselves to specific people and were like happy to serve, and that's all they did in their lives and that's all they wanted to do in their lives. And I wanted to know more about like how they got there and why they were helping these people. And then Elantrians have the ability to like write glyphs in the air and control magic, and the magic is no longer working for them, and that is explained eventually. But I wanted to understand like more so like how this magic worked, what they were able to do, what they weren't able to do with the magic, why they could use magic and other people couldn't use magic. There was just more questions I had about the world than answers. And then I feel like the book really heavily focused on the religious aspects. Brandon Sanderson's books are epic fantasy, so there is religion in a lot of his stories, and that doesn't bother me. I like fantasy religions. I think that they're such an interesting part of the world, and I like seeing how they differ from our religions, how they're the same as our religions. It was such a heavy focus of this book that there was like never a point in the story where we weren't talking about religion, and so it felt kind of preachy, even though like the religion wasn't real, and I wouldn't even say it necessarily directly correlates to a religion in our world. It felt very much like how I imagine people in the olden days felt when religious Christian crusades showed up on their doorsteps and were like, "You're part of this religion now," and they were like, what? I felt like the plot was kind of predictable. There was like maybe one reveal at the end that I was like, oh, hey, I didn't see that happening there. I felt like the romance wasn't super well done, but also I've made that complaint in other Brandon Sanderson books before. You know, you don't have to be amazing at writing romance, but if you're going to have it in your story, I at least want to believe that our two main characters have reasons to like each other. But it's also such a small part of the story that it's not a huge complaint. I think overall I was kind of bored in the book. I didn't really know what the plot or the purpose of the story was until the later parts of the book. And so for a good like 75% of this book, I was like, who's the bad guy and what are we doing and why are we doing it? Like, I get that these characters are just all adjusting to the new realms that they're in. How is this going to reveal a rising conflict and a resolve by the end of it? I ended up rating this book a 2.4, so we're gonna basically call that a 2.5. Finally, we are going to talk about The Ruin of Kings. As of us speaking right now, I have about 60 pages left in this book, but it is a reread for me and I'm planning on finishing it up today. And today, as of me filming, is January 30th. So I'm going to be counting it towards everything. I've already counted it towards the statistics and stats that you saw. Let's talk about it really quickly. This was a reread, so I have talked about this book on my channel previously. I read it previously for a book club book, and I read it again because my book club is going to be continuing on with the rest of the series, and I wanted to be reminded of everything that happened in this story and everything that's going on here. And I'm so glad I reread it because I had forgotten 90% of this book. I also liked this book more upon second reading than I enjoyed it the first time. I have an estimate for what I'm gonna rate it this time. The first time I rated it a 4.75. This time I'm rating it a 4.8, but on Goodreads I will be rounding up to a 5-star upon the second time because I just really, really enjoyed this reread. There were so many little things that I didn't realize connected the first time that now I'm like, Jen Leon's is genius, and I am so excited to be continuing on with the rest of the series. This is the story of Kieran. We are following this police transcription of his story that he told in his jail cell at the end of his life. So there are like footnotes that are referenced throughout that help you understand different things, but there are generally speaking 2 storylines happening. One is Kieran telling his story, starting from when he was bought as a slave and trained to do magic and going back to fight against his family. And the second storyline is being told by his warden, who is this crazy magical creature who can like eat people and collect their memories, and she has eaten specific people across Kieran's life. And so she is telling their memories of Kieran when he was a child, growing up on the streets, not realizing that he's part of the royal family, and how he got to become a prince of the realm and then eventually be sold as a slave, which is where his story picks up. It's such a good book. Like, it is so enjoyable. I have a thing for books that are told like, I'm at the end of my life, or I am in a jail cell and I am telling you the story of how I got here. I've read a few of them now and I've always enjoyed them. And I also seem to really enjoy books with footnotes too. I want to know about the random specific thing that you have to say about this little note here that was said. There are dragons, there are magic, there are lots of different cultures and creatures and beings. There is somewhat of a romance. There's more so like yearning, and I feel like a lot of shipping on the part of me, the reader, but I think that it's going to develop into something in later books. It is a very confusing story, and there's lots of back and forth and lots of different parts and lots of aspects and lots of characters. You're not going into this book just going to marathon it in a day and be like, cool, got it. There's going to be like focus and energy put into this story. So that's it. That's all the books that I read in January of 2022. Let me know down below how your January went. Overall, I had, 4 books that I rated 5 stars, but I feel like also I had a lot more books that I rated lower than I normally do. So I'm kind of hoping that next month we can just like snap me out of whatever I am in right now. I appreciate each and every one of you. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye.